The chandeliers blazed like captured stars above the Montclair Grand Ballroom, their light cascading over silk gowns and polished metals. 300 of the kingdom's finest had gathered for the Duchess of Montclair's annual masquerade, and somewhere among them, Eloan Fairfax was trying not to die. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed through the crowd, her ivory mask doing little to hide the terror in her eyes. The emerald gown she wore, chosen by him, paid for by him, a gilded cage of fabric, felt like chains around her body. He's coming. She could feel Lucian Vantworth's gaze on her back like a blade. She'd made the mistake of slipping away during the third waltz, desperate for air, desperate for a moment to think. Now she was paying for it. Eloan. His voice cut through the music closer than before. Don't make a scene, darling. Darling. The word dripped with warning. She moved faster, weaving between laughing couples and gossiping dowagers. Her mind raced through exits. The terrace doors were too far. The servants' corridor blocked by his cousin, the main entrance guarded by his father's men. Trapped. You're trapped. 3 weeks ago, she'd witnessed Lucian kill a man, not in a duel, not in self-defense. She'd watched him strangle the life from Marcus Holloway, his own business partner, in the wine cellar of the Vantworth estate. She'd gone down to retrieve her shawl after dinner, the same dinner where Marcus had secretly pressed a letter into her hand beneath the table. Keep this safe, he'd whispered, his eyes darting toward Lucian. If anything happens to me, get it to someone who can act on it. She hadn't understood then. She'd tucked the letter into her bodice, confused but compliant. An hour later, she understood perfectly. She'd found Marcus in the cellar, Lucian's hands around his throat. She'd pressed herself into the shadows, hand over her mouth, watching Marcus's legs stop kicking. And when it was over, she'd hidden the letter behind a loose stone in the cellar wall before fleeing into the night. But she'd made one critical error. In her panic, she'd dropped her grandmother's brooch, a distinctive piece, unmistakable. Lucian had found it the next morning. He hadn't confronted her directly. That wasn't his way. Instead, he'd accelerated their engagement, announced a wedding date without her consent, and made it abundantly clear through gentle threats what would happen if she spoke. Your sister is so beautiful, he'd said yesterday, stroking her cheek while she sat frozen in his parlor. 17 and unmarried. So vulnerable. I do hope nothing unfortunate happens to her. That was when Eloan decided to run. Tonight was supposed to be her escape. She'd planned it for days. Slip out during the masquerade, take the servants' passage to the Eastern Garden, meet the hired coach at midnight. By morning, she'd be on a ship to the continent. But Lucian had noticed her absence within minutes. His men had blocked the servants' passage, and now he was hunting her through a ballroom full of people who would never believe her if she screamed the truth. That's Lord Vantworth's bride, they'd say. She's clearly hysterical. Lucian's hand closed around her wrist. There you are. His smile was perfect, his grip crushing. You wandered off. I was worried. I needed air. Her voice came out steady. A miracle. You need me. He pulled her closer, his breath hot against her ear. Try to run again, and I'll send word to have your sister collected tonight. Do you understand? Dread coiled in her stomach. Lucian. Smile, Eloan. People are watching. She smiled. It felt like cracking glass. He began steering her toward the terrace, toward darkness, toward privacy, toward whatever punishment he'd devised. Eloan's mind screamed for a solution. Any solution? And then she saw him. A man stood alone near the marble pillar, half hidden in shadow. Tall, dark-haired, broad-shouldered. He wore no mask, which was unusual. His evening clothes were impeccable but understated, wealthy, clearly, but not ostentatious. He was watching the crowd with an expression of profound boredom, a glass of untouched champagne in his hand. He was a stranger. He was her only chance. Alawen wrenched her wrist free with a sharp twist, a trick her father had taught her years ago, and lunged toward the stranger before Lucian could react. She grabbed the man's arm with both hands, pressing close enough to feel the warmth of his body through his coat. Her fingers dug into expensive wool. "Dance with me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please. I'll explain everything, but right now, I need you to dance with me like you've known me your whole life." The stranger looked down at her. His eyes were gray, pale gray, like winter storms, and they saw everything. The terror she couldn't hide, the desperation clawing at her throat, the dangerous man approaching behind her. For one horrible moment she thought he'd refuse. Then his arm wrapped around her waist, warm and solid and sure. "Darling," he said, loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "I thought you'd never ask." And he swept her onto the dance floor. The waltz began, and Elowen let herself be guided into the current of swirling couples. The stranger moved with effortless grace, one hand firm at her waist, the other clasping her trembling fingers. "Breathe," he murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You're shaking." "I have reason to shake. Clearly." His gray eyes flickered toward the edge of the dance floor where Lucian stood watching with barely concealed fury. "The man you ran from. Who is he?" "My fiancé." Something shifted in the stranger's expression. Not quite surprise, but close. Most women run toward their fiancés, not away. Most women aren't engaged to murderers. The word hung between them, heavy as stone. The stranger didn't flinch. "That's a serious accusation. It's a serious truth." Elowen's voice cracked. "He killed someone, I saw it, and now he's going to kill me too if I can't get away from him." The waltz carried them in a slow turn. She caught a glimpse of Lucian speaking to his father, Lord Vantworth, near the champagne table. Both men were watching her, calculating. "Why hasn't he killed you already?" the stranger asked. "Because I have evidence he needs to find first. A letter his victim wrote before he died, proof that Lucian was embezzling from their shipping company. Marcus gave it to me at dinner, asked me to keep it safe. An hour later, Lucian murdered him." She swallowed. "I hid the letter before I fled. Lucian needs to know where it is before he can safely dispose of me." "And your family?" "He's threatened my sister. She's 17, innocent, completely unaware of any of this." Elowen's grip tightened on his shoulder. "If I run and he can't find me, he'll hurt her instead. If I stay, he'll eventually break me. I have no path that doesn't end in someone I love being destroyed." The stranger was quiet for a long moment, processing. "You chose to grab a complete stranger in the middle of a ballroom," he said finally. "That was either very brave or very foolish." "It was desperate. There's a difference." "Not always." He guided her through another turn, positioning them further from where Lucian stood. "What did you hope would happen?" "I hoped you'd be decent enough to play along, that it would buy me time to think." She met his eyes. "Was I wrong? About my decency?" The corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but almost. "The jury's still out." Despite everything, Elowen felt something loosen in her chest. "You're still dancing with me. I'm curious. It's a character flaw." His hand shifted at her waist, drawing her slightly closer as another couple swept past. "What's your name?" "Elowen. Elowen Fairfax." "Fairfax." Something flickered in his expression. "Recognition?" "Your father was Admiral Fairfax?" "You knew him?" "I knew of him. He was a good man, by all accounts. Died defending the Eastern Fleet." "Yes." The familiar grief pressed against her ribs. 3 years ago. After that, my mother's health declined. The debts mounted, and Lord Vantworth offered to clear them all in exchange for my hand." She laughed bitterly. It seemed like salvation at the time. "It usually does." The music swelled toward its crescendo. They had perhaps 30 seconds before the dance ended. I need to disappear, Elowen said quickly. Tonight. If you know anyone, a carriage, a safe house, anything, I can pay. Not immediately, but I have the letter. It's worth something to the right people. The stranger studied her with those unreadable gray eyes. The right people, he repeated softly. Please. She hated the begging in her voice, but pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. You're the only person who's listened to me in months. Everyone else sees Lord Vantworth's perfect son, his perfect family. They don't see what he is. And what if I'm worse than he is? Then I've traded one monster for another. She held his gaze. But you haven't hurt me yet. And he has. Right now, that's enough. The final notes of the waltz faded. Applause rippled through the ballroom. Couples separated, bowing and curtsying. Elowen's window was closing. The stranger didn't release her. There's a servants' corridor behind the third tapestry on the eastern wall, he said quietly. It leads to the garden. I have a carriage waiting at the northern gate. The driver's name is Brennan. Tell him the fox runs at midnight. Elowen's breath caught. You're helping me? I'm curious, he said again. But this time, there was something else beneath the words, something that looked almost like decision. Go now. While Vantworth is still deciding his next move, I'll create a distraction. I don't even know your name. He released her hand and stepped back, giving a formal bow that anyone watching would interpret as the polite conclusion to a dance. You will, he said. When you reach the carriage, wait for me. Then he turned and walked directly toward Lucian Vantworth. Elowen didn't hesitate. She moved through the crowd with practiced calm, her heart threatening to shatter her ribs with every beat. The third tapestry on the eastern wall, a hunting scene in faded burgundy and gold, hung heavy and ancient, its edges brushing the marble floor. She glanced back once. The stranger had intercepted Lucian near the champagne table. She couldn't hear their words, but she saw Lucien's expression shift from fury to confusion to something that looked almost like fear. The stranger was smiling, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man who knew secrets. Who is he? No time to wonder. Elowen slipped behind the tapestry, found the narrow door hidden in the wall, and pushed through into darkness. The servants' corridor was cold and narrow, lit only by sparse candles in iron sconces. She gathered her skirts and ran, her silk slippers near silent on the stone floor. Left at the first junction, down a flight of stairs, through a door that groaned with age. Then she was outside. The garden stretched before her, silver-touched by moonlight. Gravel paths wound between sculptured hedges and sleeping rose bushes. The northern gate was perhaps 200 yards away. Elowen ran. Her lungs burned. Her corset cut into her ribs. The emerald gown, beautiful, expensive, chosen by a murderer, tangled around her legs with every stride. She didn't care. Freedom was 200 yards away. 100. 50. The gate appeared through the hedges, wrought iron with the Montclair crest worked into its bars. Beyond it, a black carriage waited in the shadows, its horses breathing steam into the cold air. Brennan? She called softly. A man leaned down from the driver's seat, older, weathered, with kind eyes beneath a battered hat. Who's asking? The fox runs at midnight. Something like approval crossed his face. Get in, quickly now. Elowen climbed into the carriage, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the door handle. The interior was dark but warm, the seats covered in soft leather. She collapsed onto the bench, gasping for breath. She was out. She was free. But for how long? Minutes passed. She counted her heartbeats, trying to calm the storm inside her chest. Where was the stranger? Had Lucian discovered the deception? Were Vantworth's men already searching the gardens? The carriage door opened. Elowen pressed back against the seat, her hand flying to the small knife she'd hidden in her corset. A final precaution, probably useless, but something. The stranger climbed in, closing the door behind him. In the darkness, his face was all shadows and angles. "Drive," he called to Brennan. The carriage lurched into motion. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The wheels rattled over cobblestones. The sounds of the masquerade faded behind them. "You came," Elowen finally said. "I said I would." "People say many things. They rarely mean them." "I mean everything I say." He leaned back against the opposite seat. "It's more efficient." She studied him in the shifting moonlight that filtered through the carriage window. Without the ballroom's glare, she could see him more clearly. The sharp lines of his jaw, the faint scar above his left eyebrow, the way he held himself with absolute control. "Who are you?" she asked. "Someone with an interest in seeing the Vantworths destroyed." "That's not a name." "No." He met her eyes. "It isn't." Elowen's fingers tightened on the knife. "I just trusted you with my life. I think I deserve to know who you are." "You trusted a stranger in a ballroom. That suggests desperation, not wisdom." "You're deflecting." "I'm assessing." His head tilted slightly. "You said you have evidence. A letter. Where is it?" "Hidden." "Where?" "If I tell you that, I have nothing left to bargain with." Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. "Clever. Desperate people learn quickly." She forced herself to sit straighter, to project a confidence she didn't feel. "Now tell me your name, or stop this carriage and let me find my own way." The stranger was silent for a long moment. Outside, the city was giving way to darker roads, fewer lights. They were heading north, away from everything she knew. "Theron," he said finally. "Theron Ashworth, Duke of Thornwood." The name struck her like lightning. Ashworth. Duke. "You're—" Her voice failed. She tried again. "The Duke of Thornwood? The one who disappeared from society 5 years ago?" "The very same." Elowen's mind reeled. Theron Ashworth was legendary. The reclusive duke who'd vanished from public life after his younger brother's death. Some said he'd gone mad with grief. Others claimed he was building a political empire in the shadows. No one had seen him at a public event in years. Until tonight. "You were at the masquerade," she said slowly, "without a mask. You wanted to be recognized." "I wanted to observe." "Observe what?" "The Vantworths." His voice hardened almost imperceptibly. "They've been making alliances, consolidating power. I wanted to see who was foolish enough to stand with them. And instead you found me. Instead, I found you." He leaned forward, his gray eyes intent, claiming to have witnessed Lucian Vantworth commit murder, claiming to have evidence. "Tell me, Miss Fairfax, is any of it true? All of it? Then we have something in common." "What?" "5 years ago, Lucian Vantworth killed my brother." Theron's voice was steady, but she heard the ice beneath it. "Made it look like a duel gone wrong. Bribed the witnesses. Ran Edmund through before my brother could even raise his blade. He was 17 years old, and they put a sword through his heart because he stumbled upon evidence of their crimes." Elowen's breath caught. "I'm sorry. I don't want your sympathy. I want your evidence." He held her gaze. "You have something that can destroy them. I have the power to keep you safe while you do it." That seems like the foundation for an arrangement. "What kind of arrangement?" "The kind where you tell me everything you know, help me build an ironclad case against the Vantworths, and in exchange, I ensure that neither you nor your sister ever have to fear them again." "How can you guarantee that?" "By making you untouchable." He paused. "By making you my wife." The carriage suddenly felt very small. "You can't be serious." Elowen whispered. "I'm always serious about the destruction of my enemies." Theron's expression didn't waver. "Marriage to me puts you under the protection of the Thornwood name. The Vantworths can't touch a duchess without declaring war on one of the oldest families in the kingdom. Your sister becomes my sister-in-law, equally protected, and you gain the platform to expose what you witnessed without anyone dismissing you as a hysterical woman. You're asking me to marry you for revenge? I'm asking you to marry me for justice. There's a difference. He sat back. Think about it. We're still 2 hours from Thornwood Manor. You can give me your answer when we arrive. 2 hours to decide whether to bind herself to a stranger. 2 hours to choose between one kind of danger and another. Alawen looked out the window at the darkness rushing past and wondered if she'd escaped a cage only to walk into another. But this cage, a small voice whispered, has an open door. I don't need 2 hours, she said. Theron's eyebrow rose slightly. I have conditions, she continued. First, my sister comes to Thornwood immediately. Tonight, if possible. I won't agree to anything while she's still within the Vantworth's reach. Reasonable. What else? Second, this is a partnership, not a purchase. You don't own me, you don't control me. I'm not your weapon to aim and fire. I'm your ally. Also reasonable. Third, she hesitated. This was the hardest one. When the Vantworths fall, I want to be there. I want Lucian to see my face and know that the woman he tried to silence is the one who destroyed him. Theron studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. A real smile this time, one that transformed his cold features into something almost warm. Miss Fairfax, he said, I believe we're going to get along very well. He extended his hand across the dark carriage. Eowyn looked at it. Strong, scarred across the knuckles, belonging to a man who had just offered to make her untouchable so they could destroy their common enemy together. She'd been running from one trap all night. Now she was choosing to walk into another. But this time, she thought, I'm choosing. She took his hand. Then we have an arrangement, Your Grace. Theron, he corrected. If we're to be married, you should use my name. Theron. It felt strange on her tongue. When do we begin? We already have. His grip was firm, warm. Welcome to the war, Miss Fairfax. Outside, the first light of dawn was breaking over the eastern hills, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Alawen had fled a ballroom in terror. She was riding toward a future she couldn't predict. But for the first time in months, she wasn't running from something. She was running toward it. The carriage rolled through wrought iron gates as dawn spread golden fingers across the sky. Eowyn pressed her face to the window, her breath fogging the glass. Thornwood Manor emerged from the morning mist like something from a fever dream. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress dressed in elegance, gray stone walls softened by climbing ivy, towers that pierced the sky, windows that glittered like watchful eyes. The grounds stretched endlessly, manicured gardens giving way to dense forest that seemed to swallow the horizon. It's beautiful, she breathed. It's defensible, Theron replied. My great-grandfather built it during the Succession Wars. Every window has a clear sight line. Every corridor has an escape route. Beauty was incidental. You speak like a soldier. I was raised like one. He moved to sit beside her, his voice dropping. Before we enter, I need you to understand something. The moment you cross that threshold as my intended bride, there's no going back. The servants will know. The staff will talk. By nightfall, half the kingdom will have heard rumors. Good. Let them talk. You say that now, but rumors cut both ways. His gray eyes held hers. The Vantworths will hear that you've aligned with their greatest enemy. They'll respond. Probably within days. I'm counting on it. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or reassessment. You want them to come after you? I want them to make a mistake. Desperate people act rashly. You said it yourself. Lucian is dangerous, but he's also proud. He won't tolerate being humiliated by a woman he considered conquered. Elowen lifted her chin. Let him come. Let him overreach. And let me be ready when he does. Theron studied her for a long moment. You're not what I expected, he said finally. What did you expect? A victim. Someone who needed saving. The corner of his mouth lifted. Instead, I found a weapon that simply needed sharpening. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. He extended his hand once more. Final chance to reconsider, Miss Fairfax. Once we step out of this carriage together, our fates are bound. Elowen looked at his hand, then at the manor rising before them, then back at the road they'd traveled. The road that led to Lucian, to fear, to a life of silence and submission. There was no choice at all, really. My fate was bound the moment I witnessed a murder, she said. At least now I have a say in how it ends. She took his hand. Theron's fingers closed around hers, warm and certain. Then let's begin. The carriage door opened. Morning light flooded in, bright and unforgiving. And Elowen Fairfax stepped into her new life. Thornwood Manor was even more imposing from within. Elowen followed Theron through corridors lined with ancestral portraits and battle standards, her silk slippers whispering against ancient stone floors. Servants appeared and vanished like ghosts, efficient, silent, watching her with carefully neutral expressions. They're assessing me, she realized, deciding if I'm worthy. A woman waited at the end of the main corridor, her silver hair pulled back in a severe knot, her posture rigid as iron. She wore black bombazine and an expression that suggested she'd seen empires rise and fall and found them all lacking. Mrs. Blackwood, Theron said, this is Miss Elowen Fairfax. She'll be the Duchess of Thornwood within the fortnight. See that she has everything she needs. Mrs. Blackwood's gaze swept over Elowen, the ruined gown, the disheveled hair, the shadows beneath her eyes. Something shifted in her expression. Not approval, exactly, but perhaps the absence of immediate disapproval. Welcome to Thornwood, Miss Fairfax. Her voice was crisp as autumn leaves. Your rooms have been prepared in the east wing. I'll have a bath drawn and breakfast sent up. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Mrs. Blackwood's eyes flickered to Theron, then back. The master has high expectations. I suggest you meet them. She turned and walked away, clearly expecting Elowen to follow. Theron caught Elowen's arm before she could move. One more thing. I've already sent riders to collect your sister. She'll arrive by tomorrow evening, under guard the entire journey. Relief crashed through her like a wave. You did that? Already? I told you. I mean, everything I say. His hand lingered on her arm for just a moment. Rest today. Tomorrow, we begin planning in earnest. There's much to discuss and very little time. Theron. She stopped him as he turned to leave. Why are you really doing this? The full truth. Not the version about justice and vengeance. He was silent for a long moment. Because 5 years ago, I held my brother while he bled out in my arms. He said quietly. He was 17. He liked poetry and horses and terrible jokes. He had his whole life ahead of him, and Lucian Vantworth took it because my brother saw something he shouldn't have. His jaw tightened. I've spent every day since then building toward their destruction. I've gathered evidence, cultivated allies, waited for the perfect moment. And then you fell into my arms in a ballroom, carrying the final piece I needed. The letter. The letter, yes, but also you. His gray eyes held hers. A witness, a victim. Someone society might actually believe. He stepped back. Get some rest, Miss Fairfax. You've earned it. Then he was gone, disappearing down the corridor like smoke. Mrs. Blackwood cleared her throat. This way, miss. Elowen's rooms were larger than her family's entire London apartment. A sitting room with a fireplace tall enough to stand in. A bedroom dominated by a 4-poster bed draped in sage green silk. A private bathing chamber with a copper tub already steaming with rose-scented water. She stood in the center of it all, feeling very small and very lost. Yesterday, I was planning to flee the country, she thought. Today, I'm going to be a duchess. The absurdity of it threatened to overwhelm her. A knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. A young maid entered, barely 16, with bright eyes and copper curls escaping her cap. "I'm Nell, miss. Mrs. Blackwood assigned me to attend you." She bobbed a curtsy. "His Grace sent this. Said you should read it before you rest." She handed Elowyn a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with precise, angular handwriting. "Miss Fairfax," the first page read, "you have 2 weeks before your first public appearance as my intended. 2 weeks to learn the history, politics, and social dynamics of the Northern Territories. 2 weeks to transform from a victim into a duchess. These pages contain everything I know about the Vantworths, their allies, their enemies, their weaknesses. Study them, memorize them. We'll discuss your progress each evening over dinner. I should also tell you, I have allies in high places, people who share my desire to see the Vantworths brought to justice. When the time comes, we won't be fighting alone. Welcome to your new battlefield." Tia Lowen closed the journal and looked out the window at the sprawling grounds below. Somewhere out there, Lucian was learning she'd escaped. Somewhere, he was realizing the woman he'd meant to silence had found the one man powerful enough to destroy him. Good, she thought savagely. Let him feel hunted for once. She opened the journal and began to read. 2 weeks passed in a blur of lessons and preparation. Elowyn learned which fork to use for oysters, how to address a baron versus a viscount, which topics were acceptable in polite conversation, and which would see her shunned from society forever. She memorized the names of every noble family in the Northern Territories, their alliances, their feuds, their secrets. But more importantly, she learned about the Vantworths. Theron's intelligence network was staggering. He had informants in every major household, contacts in shipping offices and banking houses, a web of information that stretched across the entire kingdom. And all of it pointed to one truth: the Vantworth fortune was built on blood. Smuggling, fraud, murder when necessary, Theron explained one evening over dinner. They sat at opposite ends of a table meant for 20, the distance between them symbolic. Lord Vantworth has been bribing port officials for decades. Lucian handles the enforcement, making sure anyone who asks too many questions has a tragic accident. Like Marcus Holloway. Like Marcus. Like my brother. His voice remained steady, but his knuckles whitened around his wine glass. Like at least 7 others I've been able to confirm. And no one stops them? They're too powerful, too connected, too good at making problems disappear. He met her eyes. Until now. Elowyn's sister Margot arrived on the 3rd day, terrified and confused, but unharmed. She was installed in rooms adjacent to Elowyn's, with 2 guards assigned to her door and strict instructions never to leave the manor grounds. "What's happening?" Margot demanded, her 17-year-old face pale with worry. "Why are there soldiers everywhere? Why did Lord Vantworth's men come to our house asking about you?" Elowyn held her sister's hands and told her everything. When she finished, Margot was silent for a long moment. "I always thought there was something wrong with him," she said finally. "The way he looked at you. Like you were something he owned." "I was. Or I would have been, if I'd stayed. And now you're going to marry a duke instead? Now I'm going to destroy the Vantworths." Elowyn squeezed her sister's hands. "The marriage is the means to that end." "Is it?" Margot's eyes were too knowing for her years. "The way he looks at you isn't like the way Lucian did. It's different." Elowyn didn't have an answer for that. The night before her first public appearance, she stood before her mirror in a gown of midnight blue silk, diamonds glittering at her throat. Mrs. Blackwood Blackwood had supervised every detail. The elegant sweep of her hair, the subtle paint on her lips, the posture that proclaimed breeding and confidence. She looked like a duchess. She didn't feel like one. A knock at her door. Theron entered, dressed in formal black, and stopped when he saw her. "You look..." He seemed to search for the right word. "Formidable. Is that a compliment?" "The highest one I know how to give." He crossed to her, adjusting the diamond necklace slightly. His fingers brushed her collarbone, and she felt the touch like fire. "Tonight we attend Lady Hartwell's music hall. 40 guests, including 3 families who've invested heavily with Vantworth and Associates. And our goal? Plant seeds. Nothing obvious. Just questions. Just doubts." His hands fell away. "Can you do this? Watch me." The musical was held in Lady Hartwell's gilded drawing room, packed with nobility pretending to appreciate a soprano who couldn't quite hit her high notes. Elowin entered on Theron's arm, and the whispers began immediately. "Is that the Fairfax girl? The one who was engaged to Lord Vantworth's son? What's she doing with Thornwood? I thought they were enemies. She doesn't look like a nobody." Elowin smiled, curtsied, exchanged pleasantries, all while steering conversations exactly where she wanted them. "The Vantworth shipping contracts?" she said to Lady Ashbury, a widow who'd invested her late husband's fortune with the family. "I confess I've heard concerning rumors. Nothing substantial, of course, but one does wonder about their accounting practices." "Rumors?" Lady Ashbury's eyes sharpened. "What sort of rumors?" "Oh, I couldn't possibly say. It would be terribly inappropriate." Elowin lowered her voice conspiratorially. "But if I were you, I might request a full accounting of my investments, just to be safe." By the end of the evening, she'd had similar conversations with 6 different guests, seeds planted, doubts sown. The first cracks in the Vantworth reputation beginning to form. In the carriage home, Theron was silent for a long moment. "You're good at this," he finally said. "I'm angry at this." Elowin pulled off her gloves. "There's a difference." "Not always." He studied her in the darkness. "Lady Ashbury will demand an audit by morning. So will Lord Fenwick and Mrs. Ainsworth. When they find discrepancies, and they will, they'll talk. And the talking will spread. Like wildfire." He leaned back against the seat. "You just lit the match that will burn the Vantworths to the ground." Elowin looked out at the passing darkness. Somewhere in London, Lucian was still searching for her, still believing he could silence her, still certain that his family's power made them untouchable. He had no idea the fire was already burning. 3 weeks into her new life, Elowin found herself unable to sleep. The manor was silent, the corridors dark save for the occasional flicker of candlelight. She wrapped a shawl around her nightgown and wandered toward the library, the one room in Thornwood that felt almost welcoming, with its towering shelves and worn leather chairs. She wasn't surprised to find Theron there. He stood by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring out at the moonlit gardens. He'd removed his coat and cravat, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, dark hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. He looked almost human like this, almost vulnerable. "Can't sleep?" he asked without turning. "Too many thoughts." She crossed to the sideboard and poured herself a small measure of brandy. "You? I don't sleep much. Never have." He finally turned to face her. "Not since Edmund died." Edmund, his brother's name. He'd never spoken it aloud before. "Tell me about him," Elowin said softly. For a moment she thought he'd refuse. His jaw tightened, his eyes going distant. Then something seemed to release in him, a tension she hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. "He was nothing like me," Theron said. "I was the serious one, the heir, always watching and calculating. Edmund was light. He laughed constantly, wrote terrible poetry about girls he fancied, drove our tutors mad with his pranks." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Our mother used to say he was the heart of our family, and I was the spine. What happened? The real story, not the official version. Theron drained his whiskey. Edmund discovered that the Vantworths were smuggling weapons to rebel forces in the eastern colonies. Dangerous information. He came to me first, wanted my advice on what to do. His voice roughened. I told him to wait, to let me handle it. I said I'd confront Lord Vantworth myself, negotiate a quiet resolution. But he didn't wait. He was 17, impatient, idealistic. Theron's hand clenched around the empty glass. He confronted Lucian directly at a gentleman's club, demanded they cease operations or he'd go to the authorities. Lucian challenged him to a duel on the spot. That's not... Duels require seconds, witnesses, time to prepare. Lucian had already arranged everything. The witnesses were his men. The physician was on his payroll. Edmund barely had time to draw his sword before Lucian ran him through. Theron's voice cracked almost imperceptibly. I held him while he died. He apologized to me, said he was sorry for not listening, and I couldn't even tell him it wasn't his fault because there wasn't time. Elowen set down her brandy and crossed to him. Theron. She touched his arm, feeling the tension coiled beneath his skin. It wasn't your fault either. I should have acted faster. Should have protected him. You were trying to protect him. You couldn't have known Lucian would move so quickly. Couldn't I? His gray eyes met hers, filled with 5 years of guilt and rage. I knew what they were. I'd been watching them for years, and I still underestimated how far they'd go. Then don't underestimate them now. Elowen's grip tightened on his arm. We have evidence. We have allies. We have each other. Edmund's death won't be meaningless, Theron. I won't let it be. He stared at her for a long moment. You're not what I expected, he said again, but this time the words carried a different weight. You keep saying that. Because you keep surprising me. His hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his arm. I thought I was recruiting an asset, a weapon. Instead, I found... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Whatever this is, Elowen said quietly, whatever we're becoming, it's real. You know that, don't you? I know. His thumb traced circles on her knuckles. That's what terrifies me. They stood there in the moonlit library, hands intertwined, the distance between them shrinking with every breath. Something was shifting, changing, becoming more than strategy and alliance. Elowen wasn't sure if that made everything better or infinitely more dangerous. Perhaps both. 2 weeks after the music hall, the Vantworth annual charity gala arrived. 300 guests, 500 candles, enough champagne to drown a small army, and at the center of it all, Lord and Lady Vantworth, presiding over their kingdom of lies like benevolent monarchs. Are you certain about this? Theron asked as their carriage approached the glittering Vantworth townhouse. No. Elowen adjusted her gloves, deep crimson tonight, matching the gown that made her look like a flame. But certainty is a luxury I can't afford. They'd debated for days about whether to attend. The invitation had arrived a week ago, addressed to the Duke of Thornwood and his guest. A deliberate slight, refusing to acknowledge Elowen's position as his intended. Theron had wanted to decline. Too dangerous, he'd argued. Too unpredictable. But Elowen had insisted. They think I'm hiding, she'd told him. They think I'm afraid. If we don't show our faces, they'll believe they've already won. Now, as the carriage stopped and footmen rushed to open the door, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Theron descended first, then turned to offer his hand. His grip was steady, reassuring. Remember, he murmured, we stay together. We don't engage directly unless they approach first. And if anything feels wrong, we leave immediately. I remember. They walked up the marble steps together, and the doors swung open to reveal a ballroom bathed in golden light. The whispers started before they'd taken 3 steps. Thornwood brought her here? To their house? She must be mad. Or suicidal. Look at Lucian's face. Alowan followed the whispers to find Lucian Vantworth standing near the champagne fountain, his handsome face contorted with barely contained fury. Lady Vantworth stood beside him, her smile fixed like a death mask. For one electric moment, Lucian's eyes met Alowan's across the crowded room. She didn't look away. "I'm here," her gaze said. "I survived. And I'm not afraid of you anymore." Something ugly flickered across Lucian's face. Then the social mask slammed back into place, and he turned to greet another guest as if he hadn't seen her at all. "Well played," Theron murmured. "You rattled him. Good. He deserves to feel hunted." The next 2 hours were an elaborate dance of social warfare. Alowan smiled, curtsied, made conversation with guests who watched her like she was a fascinating species of exotic bird. Some were hostile, Vantworth allies who viewed her as an enemy. Others were curious, drawn to the scandal of her story. A few were quietly sympathetic, pressing her hand and murmuring words of support. Lady Vantworth cornered her near the refreshment table. "Miss Fairfax," her voice was honey-laced with arsenic. "How brave of you to attend. I wasn't sure you'd have the courage." "Courage is born from necessity, Lady Vantworth. You'd be surprised what becomes possible when one has nothing left to lose." "Nothing?" Lady Vantworth's eyes flickered to where Margot stood across the room, flanked by 2 of Theron's guards. "I'm not sure that's entirely accurate." Terror gripped her throat. "Is that a threat?" "Merely an observation." Lady Vantworth's smile didn't waver. Sisters are such precious things, so easily damaged. If anything happens to her, nothing will happen, as long as you remember your place. Lady Vantworth leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You're playing a game you don't understand, girl. Thornwood thinks he can protect you, but he can't be everywhere. Neither can his guards. One day, when you least expect it, you'll remember this conversation and wish you'd listened." She swept away before Alowan could respond. Theron appeared at her elbow moments later. "What did she say?" "She threatened Margot." Elowen's hands were shaking. "She all but promised something would happen if I didn't back down." Theron's expression went cold. "Dangerous. We're leaving. Now." "No." Elowen grabbed his arm. "That's what they want. If we run every time they threaten us, we'll spend our lives running. Your sister's safety is exactly why we need to end this? Tonight." She met his eyes. "The evidence I hid. Marcus's letter. It's time to use it. Alowan. I know where it is. I can retrieve it within the hour. And once we have it, we have everything we need to destroy them." Theron studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Where is it?" Elowan took a deep breath. "The Vantworth wine cellar. The same place I watched Lucian kill Marcus. I hid the letter behind a loose stone in the wall before I fled." "You hid evidence of murder in the murderer's own house?" "It was the last place anyone would look." She almost smiled. "I was frightened. Frightened people are creative. Or reckless. Sometimes there's not much difference." She squeezed his arm. "I need to go alone. If we both disappear, they'll notice. But if you keep them distracted—" "Absolutely not. Theron. I'm not letting you walk into that house alone, not with what they're planning." "Then come with me. But we need to move now, while the gala is in full swing." She held his gaze. "This is our chance. Maybe our only chance. Are you with me?" For a moment she thought he'd refuse. Then his hand closed over hers. "Together," he said. "Lead the way." The wine cellar was exactly as Elowen remembered, cold, dark, and haunted by memories she'd spent months trying to forget. The smell hit her first. Damp stone, aged oak, and something faintly metallic that might have been old blood or might have been imagination. Rats scuttled in distant corners. The cold seeped through her crimson gown, raising gooseflesh on her arms. She'd led Theron through the servants' passages, past the distracted staff, down the narrow stairs that descended into the belly of the Vantworth townhouse. Now they stood among rows of dusty bottles, the sounds of the gala muffled above them. There. Elowen pointed to the far wall, where a rack of vintage burgundy concealed the loose stone. Behind those bottles. Theron helped her move the heavy rack, his breath forming small clouds in the cellar's chill. The stone came free with a grinding sound that seemed impossibly loud. Behind it lay a leather pouch, still exactly where she'd hidden it 3 months ago. Elowen's hands trembled as she pulled out the contents. A letter in Marcus Holloway's cramped handwriting, along with a small ledger filled with numbers and names. "He was going to send this to the authorities the day after he died," she whispered. "He showed me during dinner, asked me to keep it safe. I didn't understand what I was looking at them. But after I saw what Lucian did to him..." Theron took the letter, scanning its contents. His face went pale. "This is more than embezzlement. This is treason." He looked at her. "They've been selling weapons to the kingdom's enemies for over a decade. If this becomes public, the Vantworths won't just face prison, they'll face execution." The word hung in the air between them. Then footsteps echoed on the stairs above. "Someone's coming," Theron breathed. He grabbed Elowen's hand, pulling her toward the shadows behind a tall wine rack. "Don't move. Don't breathe." They pressed into the darkness, bodies flush against each other, hearts pounding in tandem. The cellar door opened. Candlelight spilled down the stairs. "I know you're down here." Lucian's voice echoed off the stone walls, pleasant and poisonous. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice you slipping away? In my own house?" Silence. Elowen bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. "Come out, Elowen. Let's discuss this like civilized people." Footsteps descended slowly, methodically. "I must admit, I underestimated you. Hiding the evidence here, of all places. That took nerve." More footsteps. Closer now. "But you've made a mistake coming back for it. You see, I've been watching you all evening, waiting, hoping you'd be foolish enough to reveal where you'd hidden Marcus's little insurance policy." He was at the bottom of the stairs now. Elowen could see his shadow stretching across the floor, elongated and monstrous. "I know you're not alone," Lucian continued. "Thornwood is with you, isn't he? The grieving brother, still bitter about his little Edmund." He laughed. A cold, cruel sound. "Did he tell you how Edmund begged at the end? How he cried for his mother?" Beside her, Theron went rigid. His hand found hers in the darkness, gripping so hard it hurt. "Don't," she squeezed back. "He's baiting you." "No matter." Lucian's footsteps resumed. "You can both die down here together. Tragic accident in the wine cellar. The candle tipped over. The flames spread too quickly. By the time anyone noticed, it was too late." A soft sound, the strike of a match. Her heart seized in her chest. "Last chance," Lucian called. "Come out now, and perhaps I'll let your sister live. Continue hiding, and I promise you'll watch her die before I kill you." Theron moved before Elowen could stop him. He stepped out of the shadows, placing himself between her and Lucian. "Vantworth." Lucian's smile was triumphant. "There you are. I was beginning to think you'd lost your nerve." His eyes flickered to the darkness where Elowen still hid. "Come out, Miss Fairfax. There's no point in hiding now." Elowen stepped forward, the leather pouch clutched to her chest. "Ah!" Lucian's gaze fixed on the pouch. "You found it. How industrious." He held out his hand. "Give it to me." "No. That wasn't a request." He lifted the match higher. "This cellar is full of alcohol. One wrong move and we all burn. Is that really how you want this to end? You'd kill yourself just to stop us?" "I'd do anything to protect my family." For a moment, something almost human flickered in Lucian's eyes. You don't understand what's at stake. The Vantworth name, our legacy, everything my father built, I won't let you destroy it. Your father built a legacy on murder and treason, Theron said coldly. It deserves to burn. Big words from a man who couldn't even protect his own brother. Theron lunged. Alowan screamed as the two men collided, crashing into the wine racks with a sound like thunder. Bottles shattered, spilling their contents across the floor. The match flew from Lucian's hand, its flame extinguishing in a pool of spilled burgundy. Darkness. Chaos. The sounds of fists against flesh. Alowan fumbled for the candle Lucian had brought, her hands slick with wine. She found it, struck another match from the box he'd dropped, and light flooded the cellar. Theron had Lucian pinned against the wall, one arm across his throat. Blood dripped from a cut above Theron's eye, but his grip didn't waver. "Give me one reason," Theron growled, "not to end this right now. Because if you kill me, you'll never find them." Lucian's smile was bloody but triumphant. "Your guards aren't as loyal as you think, Thornwood. While you've been chasing shadows down here, my men have been collecting your precious cargo." "Margot." Alowan's world tilted. "What have you done?" "Insurance." Lucian's eyes gleamed. "Kill me, and she dies. Let me go. Give me the evidence, and perhaps, I'll tell you where she is." "You're lying," Theron said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Am I? Care to take that risk?" Footsteps thundered on the stairs above. "Your Grace!" A man's voice, Brennan, Theron's driver. "Your Grace, Miss Margot, she's gone. Someone took her from the ballroom." Alowan felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "No, no, no, no," Lucian laughed. "Tick-tock, Thornwood. What will it be? Justice for your brother or the girl's life?" Theron's arm pressed harder against Lucian's throat. For one terrible moment, Alowan thought he might actually kill him. Then his grip loosened. "This isn't over," Theron said quietly. "No," Lucian agreed, rubbing his bruised throat. "It isn't. You have until dawn to deliver the evidence to my father's study. If you don't, pieces of Miss Margot will start arriving at Thornwood Manor." He straightened his coat, smoothed his hair, and walked past them up the stairs, as calm as if he'd just concluded a pleasant business meeting. Alowan stood frozen, still wearing her ruined crimson gown, the leather pouch clutched in her hands. The evidence that could destroy the Vantworths, or the price of her sister's life. She had until dawn to choose. The carriage ride back to Thornwood was silent. Alowan sat rigid against the seat, her mind racing through impossible calculations. Give up the evidence. Save Margot. Watch the Vantworths escape justice forever. Keep the evidence, expose the truth, and condemn her sister to death. There was no path that didn't end in destruction. "We'll find another way." Theron's voice broke through her spiral. "I have men searching the city. We'll locate her before dawn." "And if we don't?" He had no answer. The manor was chaos when they arrived. Servants rushing, guards shouting orders, Mrs. Blackwood directing the search efforts with military precision. But Alowan walked past it all, climbing the stairs to her room in a daze. She stood at the window, watching the moon sink toward the horizon. Dawn. I have until dawn. The door opened behind her. She didn't turn. "I've sent riders to every Vantworth property within 50 miles. Theron's voice was rough with exhaustion. "If she's being held in any of their known locations, we'll find her. And if she's not?" Silence. "Then I'll give them the evidence." Alowan's voice didn't waver. "I won't let Margot die for my revenge. It's not just your revenge, it's justice. For Edmund, for Marcus, for everyone they've destroyed. Justice isn't worth my sister's life." She finally turned to face him. "Would you make a different choice? If it were Edmund? If you could have saved him by sacrificing everything else? Wouldn't you?" Theron's face crumpled. Just for a moment. Just enough for her to see the wound that had never healed. Yes, he admitted. God help me. Yes. Then you understand. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. Alawan collapsed against him. All the terror and exhaustion and grief of the past hours finally breaking through her walls. She didn't cry. She was past tears. But she held on to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to quicksand. I'm sorry, she whispered against his chest. I brought this on you. On everyone. If I'd just stayed quiet, if I'd married Lucian like I was supposed to, then you'd be dead. His arms tightened around her. Or worse, you'd be alive and broken, watching him destroy innocent people while you smiled and pretended not to see. Maybe that would have been easier. Easier isn't the same as right. He pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands. You chose truth over safety. You chose courage over comfort. That's not something to apologize for, Elowen. That's something to honor. I don't feel honorable. I feel terrified. So do I. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. But I'd rather be terrified beside you than safe with anyone else. She looked up at him. This man who'd started as a stranger, become an ally, and somehow transformed into something she couldn't name but couldn't live without. When did this happen? She asked softly. When did you become essential? I don't know. His forehead pressed against hers. Somewhere between the ballroom and now, somewhere between strategy and this. He kissed her. Not like the careful, calculated touches they'd shared in public, the performances designed to convince society of their affection. This was real. His hands tangled in her hair, her fingers clutched his shirt. And for one perfect moment, the world narrowed to just the 2 of them and the impossible, inevitable thing growing between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elowen felt something shift in her chest. I love you, she said. The words surprised her, but they felt true. Truer than anything she'd ever spoken. Theron's eyes widened, then softened, then filled with something that looked like wonder. I love you, he replied. I didn't plan to, I didn't want to, but I do, and I'm not taking it back. Even if everything falls apart tomorrow? Especially then. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. Whatever happens, we face it together. That's not strategy anymore, Elowen. That's a promise. A knock at the door shattered the moment. Your Grace. Brennan's voice was urgent. We found something. One of the guards. He confessed. He told us where they're holding Miss Margot. Theron and Elowen exchanged one look. Then they ran. The abandoned warehouse sat on the edge of the dockyards, its windows dark, its walls stained with decades of grime. The smell of salt and rotting fish hung heavy in the pre-dawn air. Somewhere inside, rats squeaked and scurried. 3 of Theron's guards had been positioned at the entrances. 2 more waited with the carriage. Are you certain this is the place? Elowen whispered. The guard confirmed it. He was paid to look the other way when they took her. Theron's jaw tightened. He's being dealt with. Dawn was less than an hour away. If they couldn't rescue Margot before then, Elowen would have to make an impossible choice. Not yet, she told herself. There's still time. They slipped through a side door, moving silently through the darkness. The warehouse smelled of salt and rotting wood, its vast interior broken by stacks of crates and abandoned equipment. Voices echoed from somewhere ahead. Don't see why we have to wait. Just kill her and be done with it. Lord Lucian wants leverage. If Thornwood doesn't deliver the evidence, we send pieces. If he does deliver, we send her body anyway. Laughter. Either way, the girl dies. Fury blazed through Elowen's veins. Not my sister. Not today. Theron touched her arm, pointing toward a raised platform at the warehouse's center. In the dim light, she could see a figure tied to a chair. Margot, her head slumped forward, but alive. 2 men stood guard nearby, their backs to the entrance. 4 more guards spread throughout the warehouse, 6 total against their 3. Terrible odds, but not impossible. Theron signaled to his men, communicating in gestures Elowen didn't understand. They fanned out, disappearing into the shadows. "Stay here," Theron breathed. "When the fighting starts, get your sister and run. Don't look back." "Theron, promise me." She grabbed his face and kissed him hard. "Come back to me." "I will." Then he was gone, moving through the darkness like a predator. The next 30 seconds stretched into eternity. Then chaos erupted. Theron's men struck simultaneously, taking down 2 guards before the others could react. Shouts filled the warehouse. Steel clashed against steel. Theron himself engaged the largest of Lucian's men, his movements precise and deadly. Elowen ran. She reached Margot in seconds, her fingers fumbling with the ropes. "Margot! Margot! Wake up!" Her sister's eyes fluttered open. "Elowen? What? Where? No time. Can you walk?" "I think so." Elowen pulled her to her feet just as a hand closed around her arm. "Going somewhere?" She turned to find one of the guards behind her, his smile cruel, a knife gleaming in his hand. Elowen didn't think. She grabbed the nearest object, a heavy brass candlestick, and swung with all her strength. The guard crumpled. "Come on!" She grabbed Margot's hand and ran toward the exit, dodging fallen bodies and scattered crates. The sounds of fighting faded behind them. They burst through the side door into the gray light of approaching dawn, and found Lucian Vantworth waiting. "Impressive," he said, clapping slowly. "I didn't think you had it in you." His eyes flickered to the warehouse. "But it doesn't matter. My father has already summoned the authorities. By noon, Thornwood will be arrested for breaking into private property and assaulting my men. Your evidence will be dismissed as the ravings of a desperate woman, and everything will return to normal." "Normal?" Elowen pushed Margot behind her. "You call murder and treason normal? I call it survival." Lucian stepped closer. "You should have stayed dead, Elowen. You should have stayed in that ballroom and smiled and played your part. But you had to be righteous. You had to be brave. Someone had to be. And look where it got you." He pulled a pistol from his coat. "Alone. Outnumbered. About to watch your sister die before I put a bullet in your heart." "She's not alone." Theron emerged from the warehouse, blood on his face, his sword drawn. Behind him came his guards, battered but victorious. Lucian's smile faltered. "Put down the weapon, Vantworth." Theron's voice was ice. "It's over." "Over?" Lucian's laugh was desperate now. "It's never over. My family has survived worse than this. We have allies in every corner of the government. We have... You have nothing." A new voice cut through the morning air. They all turned. A carriage had arrived unnoticed, bearing the royal crest. Stepping out of it was Lord Chancellor Whitmore himself, flanked by a dozen royal guards. "Lucien Vantworth," the Chancellor intoned, "you are under arrest for treason against the crown, conspiracy to murder, and crimes against the kingdom's citizens. This is absurd. You have no evidence. We have extensive evidence." The Chancellor held up a leather pouch, identical to the one Elowen still clutched in her hands, including testimony from 3 of your former associates, bank records documenting your family's treasonous dealings, and a detailed accounting of every person you've murdered to protect your secrets. Lucian's face went white. "How? Did you think you were the only one with spies?" Theron stepped forward. "I've been building this case for 5 years. Every piece of evidence, every witness, and every document. Copied and delivered to the Chancellor's office before we ever attended your gala." "The evidence you threatened her for," the Chancellor added, "was the final piece we needed." Combined with our other intelligence, the case against your family is now ironclad. Elowin stared at Theron. You knew? This whole time? I knew we were close. But Marcus's letter, your testimony, that's what made it undeniable. His eyes met hers. I should have told you. But I needed you to have the choice. I needed you to know that even if everything went wrong, justice would still be served. You could have told me. And risked you giving it away? Lucien was watching you every second. He moved toward her, his expression softening. I'm sorry. I should have trusted you with the truth. You're impossible. I know. He pulled her into his arms, heedless of the watching guards and the sputtering Lucien being clapped in irons. Forgive me? Elowin thought about hitting him. She thought about screaming. She thought about all the terror she'd felt, all the impossible choices she'd nearly had to make. Then she thought about Margot, alive and safe. About Edmund, finally avenged. Aye, about all the families who would never lose a loved one to Vantworth cruelty again. Ask me again when this is over, she said, but she was smiling. 6 months later, Elowin stood in the gardens of Thornwood Manor, watching spring unfurl across the grounds. The trials had concluded a week ago. Lord and Lady Vantworth had been executed for treason, a fate that had sent shockwaves through the kingdom's noble houses. Lucien had received life imprisonment, stripped of title and fortune, condemned to spend his remaining years in a cell barely larger than a closet. Some said it was too merciful. Elowin thought watching his world crumble around him was its own kind of justice. The Vantworth fortune had been seized and redistributed to their victims. Families who'd lost everything to embezzlement received compensation. Widows and orphans of murdered men received pensions. A foundation had been established in Marcus Holloway's name to support victims of financial crimes. And Elowin had built something of her own. The new wing is nearly finished. Margot appeared at her side, her face bright with purpose. Mrs. Blackwood says we can accept residents by month's end. The Thornwood House of Second Chances, they'd named it. A refuge for women who'd been abandoned, betrayed, or left with nothing. Just like Elowin had been. A place where they could learn skills, find employment, and rebuild their lives. Thank you for helping with this, Elowin said. I couldn't do it without you. You could. You'd just be terrible at the decorating. Margot grinned. Besides, I owe you my life. Helping women like us seems like a reasonable way to repay that. Footsteps approached behind them. Elowin turned to find Theron walking toward her across the lawn, the spring sunlight catching the silver at his temples. He looked lighter these days. The grief that had haunted him for 5 years had finally begun to lift. Edmund would never be forgotten, but the wound had started to heal. The architect has questions about the library, he said. Apparently someone changed the plans without consulting him. The original plans had terrible lighting. Women learning to read deserve proper windows. I'll tell him to add more windows. Theron smiled. A real smile. One that transformed his entire face. You know, when I pulled you onto that dance floor, I never imagined this. A house full of women learning arithmetic? A life full of purpose. He took her hand. Full of meaning. Full of you. Margot made a gagging sound. I'm going inside before this gets romantic. She fled, leaving them alone in the garden. Theron reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I already have a ring, Elowin said, laughing. You have an engagement ring. This is different. He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold band set with an emerald that matched her eyes. It was my mother's. She gave it to my father on their 10th anniversary. Said it represented choosing each other, not just once, but every day. Elowin's throat tightened. Theron, we married for strategy, he said quietly. We stayed married for survival. But I choose you now, Elowin, not because I need to, but because I want to. Because you make me better. Because every morning I wake up grateful that you grabbed me in that ballroom and demanded I dance with you. I didn't demand. I whispered. You commanded. There's a difference. He slid the ring onto her finger, beside the gold band she'd worn for 6 months. I love you. I'll love you tomorrow. I'll love you every day until I die, and probably several days after that. Just to be thorough. Elowen laughed through the tears streaming down her face. You're impossible. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true. She pulled him down and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into the connection. Gratitude, joy, love, and the fierce certainty that she'd found exactly where she belonged. When they finally broke apart, the sun had climbed higher, bathing the gardens in gold. What now? She asked. Now? Theron wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. Now we live. We build. We help as many people as we can, and we face whatever comes next together. Together, Elowen agreed. She'd walked into that ballroom desperate and alone, clutching a stranger and begging for salvation. She'd found something better than salvation. She'd found home. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. If this story touched something in you, the courage to fight back, the power of choosing your own path, the hope that even the darkest nights can lead to the brightest dawns, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling us your favorite moment and where you're listening from. If you're ready for another story where love conquers the impossible, subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the next chapter. You're the reason these stories exist. Thank you for being here, for listening, for believing that sometimes the stranger you grab in a moment of desperation turns out to be exactly who you needed all along.